One of the staple sketches throughout Sesame Street's over 50-year run is a series called Waiter Grover, starring the titular furry little monster. On its face, the premise is quite simple. As a service worker, Grover tries his best to please frequent customer Mr. Johnson by fulfilling his orders, but through a series of different comedic failures, disappoints him. In these sketches, Grover comes across as naive but well-meaning, but I would like to put forth the theory that he is not as innocent as he attempts to come across, with many of these sketches throwing a clear level of malice. For example, when Mr. Johnson attempts to order a hamburger in episode 0705, Grover claims the restaurant offers only 2 sizes of the item, big and small. While the description is true, both are proportioned abnormally, with the big hamburger Grover brings out literally tearing a hole through the restaurant's door. Viewers may assume that this could be the restaurant's gimmick, but it seems unlikely considering no prior damage to the building is present beforehand. This implies that it was instead a scheme to embarrass the businessman turned unsatisfied patron. In There's a Fly in My Soup, from episode 1134, Mr. Johnson is justifiably upset when he finds a fly in his soup. He calls for the waiter, who incidentally happens to be Grover again, for help. Grover then looks under and around the bowl rather than in the soup. Mr. Johnson bursts out in anger that it is in fact within his meal.
The fly is in my soup and you haven't even looked in my soup. You looked everywhere but in my soup.
Grover then shouts back that he will instead return with the restaurant's special item of that day, which it turns out is the cream of mosquito. What this means is up for interpretation to the viewer. Judging from Johnson's reaction, it's clear that insects are not a common delicacy within Sesame Street. However, the restaurant is clearly busy enough that other customers are enjoying their meal. There are 2 important distinctions to make here. Mr. Johnson's ordering experience is unique to other patrons, as the restaurant maintains enough positive business to stay afloat. And Mr. Johnson, despite going to several different restaurants, he only manages to be served by Grover. See, in several sketches, Johnson attempts to take his business elsewhere. However, his fleeing from Grover is futile, as wherever he goes, Grover somehow always happens to be working there as well. From the Casa de Camadas to Monsterpiece Theater, this occurs in multiple sketches across several different chains, but I'll be fixating on one occurrence in particular. In episode 2582, he enters O'Brien's fast food restaurant, only to once again find Grover working there as well. He bemoans,
Oh no, it's you from Charlie's restaurant. Every time you wait on me, I don't get what I want, and it takes forever.
He clearly is aware of the absurdity that somehow Grover has followed him to every location he attempts to dine at, but is at a loss of how this could be. At the end of the escapades, he even tries to do so again, protesting that he'd had it, and that he was going back to Charles. Conveniently, Grover clocks out immediately to follow him, and presumably serve him there.
That does it. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to another restaurant. I'm going to Charlie's for lunch.
Oh, good, so am I. That is my other waiter job. Let us go together and I shall serve you lunch.
The hapless customer appears sympathetic at this point. He is simply a hard-working businessman on lunch break who is hungry for a meal. Yet for some reason every day he is forced to undergo the perils of Grover as his server. Grover seems to work everywhere despite being incompetent, begging the question of how he remains employed at not just one, but seemingly every food establishment in Sesame Street. There are 4 primary divisions within the Muppet species. Big Bird and Kermit are animals. Abby Cadabby is a fairy. Bert and Ernie are people, hence why they wear clothes. And finally there are monsters, of which Grover is ostensibly a part of. Seldom is discussed the socio-political implications of these classifications, but it's implied in the feature film Elmo and Grouchland that some monsters originate from alternate universes in which their variant of the species thrives. This is why Oscar is not considered a monster, but a grouch. Other monsters have specific characteristics to them as well. Cookie Monster is an obvious example, but Elmo is defined by his childlike innocence and joy. So what exactly kind of monster is Grover, and why does he seem to torment Mr. Johnson so specifically? Grover's in-universe origins are difficult to pinpoint. He has a mother, though little is known or seen from her. We know from contextual clues that Grover and Mr. Johnson's first collision was at Charlie's restaurant. with Johnson often referring to him as the waiter from Charlie's. The very first appearance of the duo was in episode 0276 for Alphabet Soup. It's through these initial iterations that we begin to realize that Mr. Johnson wasn't so innocent after all. In later sketches, Mr. Johnson's demands seem reasonable. It is unacceptable to find flies in your food, and it is not irrational to ask for a big hamburger. However, early on he was an annoying customer, wasting Grover's time with extremely petty grievances. For example, in the aforementioned Alphabet Soup, he reached through every single individual letter to make sure each was represented within his meal, forcing Grover to return to the kitchen numerous times to retrieve any he found missing. Then, once the criteria was finally met, he refuses to eat the dish, as it had gone cold.
The soup's cold. Take it back and get me another bowl.
In the next, picture menu, he asks for the sandwich seen in their promotional material. Grover returns with the sandwich, only for Johnson to reveal that he wanted the entire meal, and wastes time by not specifying every item that he wanted. He then leaves at the end in a huff, exclaiming he no longer had time to eat it, as if this was Grover's fault.
What, goodbye, sir? What?
Well, my lunch hour's over. I don't have time to eat it now. See you tomorrow.
Charlie, I quit! I've had it! I'm not gonna take it anymore!
In Chicken Soup, Grover makes a genuine error and forgets to provide Johnson with a spoon for his soup. Rather than tell him, he exclaims, "From now on, I'm bringing my lunch to work in a sack," before forcing Grover to guess what he was upset about. The final straw is episode 0408's Bacon and Eggs, in which Johnson can't decide how many eggs he'd like. He takes an exorbitant amount of time deciding. When he finally concludes on an amount, Grover brings him the plate, only for Johnson to then blame the innocent waiter for taking too long, and demanding he be allowed to change his order to lunch items. It's following this incident that Grover begins to fight back, with the subsequent skit being the infamous hamburger incident. I posited before that Grover is a monster. He likely had a specific classification a la Elmo and Cookie Monster. One theme common throughout all of his sketches is that despite being a nuisance, his penultimate goal is to help people. Take for example the superhero persona he developed called Super Grover. Though incompetent, he has well-meaning intentions, and usually tries to do good. This is why Mr. Johnson is able to take advantage of him at first. Under the belief he had genuine customer complaints, Grover attends to him only to have his time wasted by a wealthy businessman, having a power trip over minimum wage workers. While we only get to see how he treats Grover, imagine how he must treat every other employee within the food industry. He is a menace. And again, Grover is competent enough of a fast food employee that multiple restaurants are willing to employ him part-time. While he is clumsy, the degree you see in the later interactions between him and Mr. Johnson is intentional. It's likely that the continuous slights motivated him to not just target Mr. Johnson while at work, but to take up multiple jobs to not only ensure communication, but to also spare other coworkers the trouble of dealing with such an unruly customer. Grover victimizes Mr. Johnson so effectively that many without the necessary context may feel bad for him. But make no mistake, Johnson deserves all of it, and Grover's greatest accomplishment in his pursuit to help others is preventing this man from interacting with anybody else. Like the monster that hides under his bed, for his sins he is forever doomed to be haunted by Grover wherever he attempts to dine. When he asked for the waiter, the monkey's paw curled, and now the waiter he so desperately wanted the attention of, he can no longer escape. Grover is his own personal demon, a testament to all of us who have worked service jobs and dealt with the wrath of humans.